Welcome, Talmidim, to our second installment with Tishrei with the Rebbe. This installment will focus on Aseres Yemei Teshuva and Yom Kippur, and to lead us through this experience, we have Rabbi Mendel Lipsker, Shliach of the Rebbe to Sherman Oaks, California, who has been kind enough to take of his time and his shlichus to join us and share his memories, his experience when he grew up in 770 in the Chutzner of the Rebbe. Thank you very much, Rabbi Lipsker, for joining us. Without further ado, take it away.
Thank you, and welcome, Talmidim. My name is Mendel Lipsker, as you mentioned. Thank you for the opportunity. I grew up in Morristown, New Jersey, but for Tishrei, we were by the Rebbe for many years. My memories begin Tafshin Lamed Daled through Tafshin Nun Daled, basically 21 years. And besides a few years that I was away on Shlichus as a Bacher in Argentina, so I missed half a Tishrei Tafshin Nun and half a Tishrei Tafshin Nun Aleph. So there are many years and many interesting memories. We're going to begin now about Aseres Yemei Teshuva. First of all, Tzvim Gedalia. Tzvim Gedalia was after a late night, or half a night, after Keshel Bracha, Motzei Rosh Hashanah. Motzei Rosh Hashanah, Keshel Bracha could go pretty late. So the morning until Tavshin Memches, the Rebbe's minyan was 9:30, and not everyone was on time, but by the time Slichas came around, it was pretty full. Those years, until Tavshin Memches, the Rebbe would only come in for Slichas, Tzem Gedalia Shachris. The Rebbe would not daven with the minyan those years, only a few times a year. Very interesting. Until Tavshin Memches, one was able to see the Rebbe in Tefillin, Talis and Tefillin, only a few times a year, which is when the Rebbe davened for the Amid, Vav Tishrei, Yud Shvat, and Chaf Av. This is before Chaf Beis Shvat. And Purim, and Erev Yom Kippur, and Erev Rosh Hashanah. That's it. Other days we didn't see the Rebbe with Talis and Tefillin. Including Tzem Gedalia, the Rebbe came for Slichos. Now, when the minyan says Slichos, in davening, we don't start from Ashrei, right? We start from Dirshu, a bunch of paragraphs later. But when the Rebbe comes in, the Rebbe was not with the minyan, so the Rebbe himself started from Ashrei. So Slichos, the Chazan, and Tzem Gedalia always needed to go much slower to give time for the Rebbe to catch up with the minyan. Just an interesting anecdote. Of course, the Rebbe got an aliyah by Shachris and by Mincha, and said the Haftarah. And after Tavshin Mem, when the Rebbe started speaking in the early Mems, Divrei Kavushin, the Rebbe also spoke a Sicha, Tzem Gedalia, in the afternoon. That is memories from Tzem Gedalia. Ma'ariv was always very early, so the fast can end earlier.
Was there any difference by the Rebbe in the later years when the Rebbe would daven downstairs?
As far as I remember, Slichus at Tzem Gedalia was always downstairs, at least from the mid-Lameds further. I'm not 100% sure about this, but definitely because of the large amount of Archim, the Rebbe came downstairs, and the Bima that now stands all year round was only up for Tishrei, for a certain time of Tishrei, when the Gabayim asked special permission from the Rebbe if they can build a bima because more people want to see. And generally, any type of change in 770, the Rebbe took very cautiously and very slowly. So it only went very gradual. The bima had to go up by a certain time and down by a certain time. And only from Tafshin Nun, I believe, the bima stayed up for the whole year. Then when the Rebbe davened after Tavshin Memches with the minyan, so everything was just already with the minyan. this is the time during Aseres Yemei Teshuva when a lot of more Archim started showing up, even people that couldn't be by the Rebbe for Rosh Hashanah. More people came for Yom Kippur, and obviously many more came after Yom Kippur for Sukkot. The next special day, I want to mention about Aseres Yemei Teshuva that in the earlier years, the Rebbe did not always write a Michtav Kloli. The Rebbe used to write general letters for Tishrei, Chai Elul, and before Rosh Hashanah, and some years, the Rebbe also wrote Michtav Kloli, Vav Tishrei, or Aseres Yemei Teshuva. So that was another addition to have another letter from the Rebbe, as well as some years, there was also a Sicha to the women during Aseres Yemei Teshuva, and some years later on, there were also more Sichais. Besides Vav Tishrei, like we'll soon speak about, there were other Sichais during the Aseres Yemei Teshuva, especially in the later years, and the Rebbe gave more dollars, and said more Sichais, and was Magia Maimarim, and Sichais. So Tishrei was a very packed schedule for anybody who even wanted to keep up with the Rebbe, and even in the first half of Tishrei, there was very little sleeping. If you just wanted to keep up with basically what's happening and learn all the new things that were published, and be at the times you'll be able to be with the Rebbe. Should we move on to Vav Tishrei?
Certainly, yeah. Let's move on.
Vav Tishrei was a very special day, at least from my childhood, because Rebbe Simchana's Yortzeit. And the Rebbe would daven for the Amud. It was one of the only few times where the Rebbe would daven for the Amud, and sometimes Vav Tishrei was Shabbos. And you can hear the Rebbe be Chazan for all the davenings of Shabbos. Actually, I think once or twice Vav Tishrei, maybe once, the Rebbe even davened during the weekday with the Nusach of Shabbos. And that was a very interesting mincha as well. It happened once in Yud Shvat as well. But Vav Tishrei, what was very special, the Rebbe would daven for the Amud from a young child. I had the privilege to be in the close circle around the tables that were around the Rebbe davening for the Amud. You can actually see me in the picture here. That's up there behind the table, the little guy squeezing between all the adults. And so it was pretty a big schus to hear the Rebbe's nusach and davening and watch how the Rebbe davened for many years, because this is before Chaf Beis Shvat, when the Rebbe then davened the whole year. So we had many, many more opportunities, unfortunately, when the Rebbetzin passed away. But Vav Tishrei was a special time, and especially the Rebbe also started singing Avinu Malkeinu many times by Shachris and by Mincha. That was another interesting time to be able to hear the Rebbe singing live the beginning of Avinu Malkeinu. I'll say something interesting. Most probably people know it because it's kind of common sense. But in Aseres Yemei Teshuva, we sing Avinu Malkeinu. When do we say the first Avinu Malkeinu? Avinu Malkeinu Chatanu Lefanecha. After the song? So this is the way the Rebbe did it. Vav Tishrei, and it was clear, it's on the recordings, the Rebbe would say, Avinu Malkeinu Chatanu Lefanecha, ay, 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 ay. So obviously during Yom Kippur it was the same thing. You can watch the Rebbe do Avinu Malkeinu Chatanu Lefanecha, and then start ay, 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 the niggin, and then sing Avinu Malkeinu Lanu Melech Eloata, and after that, continue with the rest of the Avinu Malkeinu. Just figured a little bit of an anecdote to know the Seder of davening. Of course, go ahead.
Anything worthwhile mentioning regarding the Farbrengen, the Negei Vav Tishrei?
The Vav Tishrei was always an interesting Farbrengen, whether it was Shabbos, whether it was weekday, because the Rebbe would make a siyum many times. The Rebbe would speak very interesting sichais. When it was a weekday Farbrengen, the Rebbe spoke different inyanim. It was very... Whenever there were lots of guests in 770, there was more light, there was more joy. You can see by the Rebbe being happy that his Hasidim, his kinder are in town and from all over the world. So it was definitely always a very lebedik of Farbrengen. There are lots of interesting video clips from these Farbrengens. Of course, the Rebbe would also make a magbis then for Keren Chana, collect money. People would write their names and mother's names quickly on a piece of paper, put in some cash into an envelope, and you can see on some videos all the envelopes were passed up to the Rebbe during the end of the Farbrengen, and the Rebbe would walk out with a full bag of envelopes. That was called a Magdis, which happened by the Rebbe's Farbrengens a few times a year. Very interesting. And when the Rebbe was Chazan, when Vav Tishrei was Shabbos, of course, it was one of the highlights to hear the Rebbe sing Hu Elokeinu in Musaf. Because many times when the Rebbe was Chazan, he would sing the whole Hu Elokeinu himself the second time around when the Chazan sang. When the Chazan repeats Hu Elokeinu, the Rebbe would sing Hu Elokeinu, Hu Avinu, Hu Malkeinu, Hu Moshiach, etc. The Rebbe, I never heard the Rebbe do ya shenis b'karov. The Rebbe would pause, and the Rebbe would say shenis b'karov or shenis b'karov, and the Rebbe would end. The ending would always be a little bit different. Sometimes the end would be just saying the words, and sometimes it would be singing until the end. You want to ask something, Reb Label?
It should go. We shouldn't pass Vav Tishrei in the Farbrengen without mentioning the Rashi Sichos that the Rebbe began in honor of the Rebbe's mother.
Of course, in honor of the Rebbe's mother's passing, the Rebbe started Rashi Sichos, and also in that time, shortly after, the Rebbe started the Urim Anigeres Teshuva, and then when the Rebbe's fathers, which the Rebbe Simchana, the Rebbe spoke many times, she had Mesiras Nefesh to make ink, and then when the Rebbe's father, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak's Sfarim came, the Rebbe started explaining that as well during the Farbrengens. Many times during Vav Tishrei Farbrengen, there were also dignitaries, politicians, Rabbanim, and the Rebbe would speak topics that are also connected to Tzarchei Tzibur and leadership, etc.
It's interesting because it goes right into the next topic that we have, which is the Machne Yisrael.
Machne Yisrael Development Fund started in the mid-Mems, and only later on, the Rebbe also started a meeting with the Machne Yisrael Development Fund, the people of the donors, also to have a meeting during Tishrei, during Aseres Yemei Teshuva. I think it only happened, I'm not 100% sure, maybe 3 or 4 times. And because 2 of them I wasn't there because I was away on Shlichus, I don't have personal memories. But it was definitely a time when the Rebbe spoke about why we give lekach, and the Rebbe would give them lekach, and the Rebbe would give many brachas, and of course the Rebbe would give a lesson for that year, and then it would be like a personal short yichidus, which was a big chiddush because Tishrei time the Rebbe was always very busy, and for the Rebbe to have such a long yichidus with so many people was a clear Mesira, a clear, complete connection of the Rebbe to the Hasidim, which was something that everybody felt, that the Rebbe would spend so much time with the Hasidim. And as the years went by, the Rebbe spent more and more and more time with the Hasidim during Tishrei.
So this is all leading up to Erev Yom Kippur, which was a pretty intense day by the Rebbe.
Erev Yom Kippur used to be the only time the Rebbe gave lekach before Yom Kippur, and then later again Haishayna Rabbah for those Urchim who were not there at Erev Yom Kippur. But as the crowd grew larger, so before Tavshin Lamed Ches, everybody that was in town used to go for lekach, and even children, grandparents, parents, children, everybody went for lekach. And then the crowd became so big. And after the Rebbe suffered a heart attack in Tavshin Lamed Ches, they asked people should not go as much, only each head of a family went. So less and less people went, and the line became kind of shorter, more manageable. But then as the Orchim became more and more, the Rebbe started giving lekach a few days before Yom Kippur. And it was a beautiful time. The Rebbe would give lekach and wish everyone a Shana Tova Masukah. That's me in the picture there with my sister and my father holding my other sister. At that time, I believe that picture was in the book called Rebbe. It was Tishrei Tafshin Lamed Daled or Lamed A. And then this is the Rebbe giving lekach by his sukkah Shayna Rabbah. And here, when the Rebbe gave lekach a few days before Yom Kippur, the Rebbe gave by the door from a big box. In the later years, they packed it in plastic bags, so it was easier for the Rebbe to give out. And one year, the Rebbe gave lekach together with a kuntris, together with a michtav kloli. In that envelope, there was a kuntris that the Rebbe gave out, plus a letter from the Rebbe, michtav kloli, plus $1, plus a piece of cake in that yellow manila envelope. I wasn't there then, but that was I believe, a very, very long distribution. I think it lasted like 4.5 hours. It ended like 1 o'clock in the morning or something. Erev Yom Kippur, we were able to see the Rebbe multiple times. First, arriving to 770 to do kaparis in his office. Then taking the chicken to kaparis. Then going to the mikveh. Then coming to shachris. Then coming to mincha. Then going home for the Suda, or something that was sometimes before mincha, many times, and then by the bracha of the Bachrim, and then Kol Nidre. So let's begin from the beginning. Kaparis, from what I remember, was somewhere between 6:30 and 7 o'clock in the morning. The Rebbe would come from his house. One year I remember 6:15, but usually it was about 6:30, 6:45. The Rebbe would go into his office for a few minutes, do kaparas, and then walk out with the kapara into the sukkah that's in the chutzner of 770, that big sukkah till today. Here you see a picture of it. And the Rebbe would walk out with the chicken and hand it to the shochet. I remember in the earlier years when I was there, all the years of the Lameds and the early Mems, there was not a big crowd watching. It was not pushy. It was quiet. Every year, more and more and more people found out or figured out that it's something to be seen, and more people started to come. In the later years, it became so full that they moved it, and they didn't want the Rebbe to walk all the way to the sukkah, or maybe for more people to watch. So the Rebbe did it in front of 770 by the front door. Just to note, when I say in the sukkah did not have schach yet. The schach was only put up after Yom Kippur. The sukkah was built. And it was a sight. First of all, when the Rebbe held the chicken, later years they tied the feet of the chicken. But in the earlier years, the feet of the chicken were not tied. And the Rebbe would hold the chicken kind of with both hands.
If you look at the picture, you actually could see the feet tied together.
Yeah, that's in the later years. After Memches, I believe, they started doing that. If you look at earlier pictures, the feet were not tied. And the chicken was super quiet, always. It was like just sitting calm. And as soon as the shochet would get the chicken, it would start making noise. I remember as a kid always saying, wow, when the Rebbe held the chicken, it's all quiet. As soon as the shochet takes the chicken, quack, quack. And the Rebbe watched the shchita. There was an interesting expression on the Rebbe's face during the shchita. Like the Rebbe would watch the shchita, but kind of not like watch directly. Like the Rebbe would give a little shiver when the shochet would shech the chicken. And then the Rebbe would watch the shochet check his chalif after the shchita, and then would pull out a few feathers of the chicken, give it to the Rebbe, and like a dustpan, like a garbage dustpan. It was covered with paper and had sawdust in it, and they would give the Rebbe the feathers, and the Rebbe would cover the blood 3 times with the feathers. Because a friend of mine was a grandson of the shochet, Rabbi Kalmanson, so one year I got one of the feathers. But over the years I lost it, so I don't know what happened to it. Because he gave the feathers back to the shochet, and the shochet would put the feathers in his pocket, and then he gave it out to his grandchildren.
Whatever happened to the chicken?
The chicken, they would put in a garbage can right away. It would bounce up and down. They would take the chicken and kosher it. I don't know for sure what happened to it. There are different rumors. In the name of Rabbi Kalmanson, they said that the Rebbeim used to eat the chicken Erev Yom Kippur by the Suda, the same day. Another version I heard, the Rebbe would send it to Machan Chana, so the girls in Machan Chana, they should have it during the meal. Also, by the way, there was always another chicken of the Rebbetzin that was brought to 770, and the Sheikhet, after shechting the Rebbe's chicken and the Rebbe left, the Sheikhet would shech the Rebbetzin chicken. Somehow I remember a few years that the Rebbetzin chicken was a perfectly white, like very clean. You know, chickens are sometimes dirty, but the Rebbetzin chicken looked like it went through a car wash of some sort. It was very, very clean, extremely clean. Maybe someone cleaned it before they brought it to the Rebbetzin. I don't know. Just a comment I remember as a kid.
That was kaparis, and I guess Erev Yom Kippur Shachris was Shachris, and then they gave out lekach, and then then Mincha happened. What happened before Mincha?
Yeah, so the Rebbe went to the mikvah, and then Shachris was pretty quick. Like I mentioned before Minchas was one of the only times you saw the Rebbe in Tefillin, and then before Mincha was a long entrance. Was probably the longest entrance the Rebbe had into 770 from the back to the front was Erev Yom Kippur, because all the pushkis in the back of 770 was a table with pushkis. In the middle of 770 was a table with pushkis. Towards the front of 770 were a table with pushkis. And as the years went by, people put more and more and more pushkis and plates and boxes and all sorts of shapes and colors, as you can see here. And the Rebbe put a coin or two into every single pushka. The Rebbe used to carry a bag of some sort, or I think it was more like an envelope full of money, coins, and if they would finish, the Rebbe would ask put his hands in his pockets and ask sometimes the secretary to bring more, and the Rebbe would make sure every single one got. There were some years that it was so much that it was like they were concerned it would take way too much time, so they made a shtickle seder, only a certain, because every organization put a pushka on every table. So they made a shtickle seder, only a certain amount of pushkas and only one per organization, so it became a little more manageable in the later years. I believe one year the Rebbe also gave coins to the children to give into the pushkas. Sometimes that happened as well. And of course, right after Mincha was the famous bracha the Rebbe would give. As a child, I still remember the bracha being very short. As a child, I remember one year, I believe there wasn't even a bima, perhaps, Erev Yom Kippur, but the Rebbe stood like they made steps or a big platform. The Rebbe stood on the platform or a big box or something for the brachos, or would walk up on some steps. But once there was a bima, the Rebbe would stand, like you see here in the picture, on the side of his stender, facing the crowd, and the Rebbe would say a bracha. It was a short bracha, maybe 5 minutes maximum. The most I remember in those years, 10 minutes. Here you see, I think it's Rabbi Notik, I'm not sure, holding a mic up to the Rebbe. It wasn't even an official sicha. They didn't even put like a mic stand with a microphone. He just held, so to speak, like an unofficial mic. And the Rebbe would say the entire bracha with closed eyes. Entire bracha. The Rebbe would close his eyes and say the Ibishtal Zal Benshem, Yeder and Fanayich, and start a whole, was a nusach of a bracha. It wasn't even the song of a sicha. It was like a song more like a yechidus bracha. The tone of the sicha, and it was short. And as the years went by, by the time Mem came, and then the brachas got longer and longer, then it turned into a sicha, and sometimes a very long sicha, half an hour or more. And then
these brachas were for everyone?
These brachas were for everyone. 770 was packed, men, women, and children. In the early years, the Rebbe would even do it twice if some people missed it. But this was for everyone. And right afterwards, this is already late in Erev Yom Kippur, the Bachram upstairs would immediately type it up. And so and before Yom Kippur, on 770's walls, the bracha was already hanging. So everyone that came to shul that may have missed it or maybe wanted to hear it again was able to read the bracha that the Rebbe gave. It was hanging upstairs and downstairs in the hallway and downstairs in the back of the shul. They hung it up on the wall so you can actually read the Rebbe's bracha already that he gave in the afternoon, already in the evening. Afterwards, everybody ran again home to eat the Sudas HaMafsekes. Of course, it was a hustle bustle because everyone would go to the mikveh 3 times, Erev Yom Kippur before davening, and again before mincha, and again after the Sudas HaMafsekes. And then came the whole concept of the bracha to the Bachrim. Birchas Habanim, a very special time, like it says in Sefer HaManhagim, a time when a father is supposed to bench his own children. And to the Rebbe, the Yeshiva Bachrim are his children. That's what the Rebbe said in the first year. And he asked all the Bachrim to come into his room. He gave a few brachas, a few shifts. Later on, it became only one shift. It started in the Rebbe's room, then it moved to Gan Eden HaTachtoin, then it moved to the hallway upstairs, then it moved into the small zal. And that's where it was until the last year. And Bachrim would stand packed. It was so packed, people would faint. People would go right after mincha. They would already catch a place and eat the Sudas HaMafsekes there. And
Just to
wait
note, this
until
picture is
the
not.
Rebbe would come in. After Tashel.
Just to note that this picture is not a picture that was taken then. This is just an example picture of recent years, but just to give the viewer an idea of what you're referring to.
Right. There are some videos of before the bracha and some videos of the Rebbe's bracha. Obviously, also we can sometimes see the angle of the crowd. After Tafshil Lamed Ches, this is the sukkah by the Birchas Habanim. After Tafshil Lamed Ches, they made a seder. If you're getting married that year, if you're already a chassan, or you're above the age of 23, I believe, then you can go, or 22, then you can go into the zal. If you're 1 year less, 22, or if you came back from Shliach, you can go into the zal. If you're 22, or you have to go into the back room, Cheder Sheni. If you're 21, you can go in the hallway. And everybody else had to be in the sukkah. Maybe I'm mistaken with 1 year. So all my years, most of the years that I was there, I had to stay in the sukkah, and we always tried to get a front row so I can actually hear the Rebbe's bracha. Until Tavshim Memches, they would put the Rebbe's bracha on a microphone. Even downstairs in shul, as a child, we heard the Rebbe's bracha to the Bachrim downstairs. After, I think, Lamed Ches, they started broadcasting the Rebbe's bracha downstairs, so everyone can hear it downstairs. Obviously, after my bar mitzvah, I went upstairs to the sukkah to try to hear the bracha directly from the Rebbe. And sometimes the bracha went into Shkia, and they had to cut the microphone at that point.
This is a still from a video or a picture, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. After Tavshim Memches, the Rebbe would light candles before the bracha, so the bracha was not recorded anymore. Only Bachrim would stand and to remember the bracha, and they would think. And some Bachrim, because until Shkia, they were able to write still. Some of the manichim, but sometimes the bracha went way past Shkia, and then it was only written from memory. The bracha was very special. The Rebbe said Birchas Koyanim, and the Rebbe spoke very daringly in a very close and endearing, loving way to his children, the Bachrim. It was so hot. As soon as the Rebbe finished the bracha, everybody would charge for the sinks downstairs and outside to be able to just to drink something or wash their face off in the times where it would end before Shkia, and it was like a whole shaila. There used to be a sink downstairs in the back of 770, and the guys would wash their face, and the Rebbe would come down, and everyone had to run away from the sinks because it was a shaila if it was already Shkia. Now, as soon as the Rebbe would finish the bracha upstairs to the Bachrim, most of the years immediately would go back into his room maybe for a half a minute, and sometimes go directly down to Kol Nidre, downstairs. So the Bachrim had a very difficult time running. Whoever wanted to go downstairs in 770 who had a place to be able to see Kol Nidre, it was very hard because the Rebbe would go very quickly down to his place for Kol Nidre. But because before Kol Nidre there's lots of Tehillim said, so there was enough time to be able to get somewhere to the front or to your place or near your parents or whatever a person had a seat or to push to be able to watch Kol Nidre. It was not easy to see Kol Nidre at all, because for Kol Nidre, the Rebbe would go off the bima down next to the Chazan. There would be another stender of the Rebbe be put to the right side of the Chazan. That's where the Rebbe would be for Kol Nidre. That's where the Rebbe would be for Cheshainis on Hoshana Rabbah as well.
If I could just interject over here, when you're just for the Talmidim who may not be familiar with the terminology, when you're saying the bima, what are you referring to?
The bima, I'm referring to the platform that the Rebbe stood on in the front of 770. The Rebbe's place now is always on a platform, right? On a high platform. That's called the bima, not the bima where they read the Torah. Sorry. When I say the Rebbe's bima, there was a bima where they read the Torah in the center of the shul, and then there's the Rebbe's bima where the Rebbe stood in Mizrach. But for Kol Nidre and for Heshainas, the Rebbe would walk down from the bima onto the floor and would be next to the right side of the chazan. The chazan next to the Aron Kodesh, and to the right side of the chazan, that's where the Rebbe would stand for Kol Nidre. I was lucky. My father had his Zoldan Gesund, had a seat in the fourth bench from Mizrach, on the left side of the Aron Kodesh, so I was always able to see the giving of the Sefer Torah to the Rebbe before Kol Nidre, and pretty much watch the Rebbe during Kol Nidre. Obviously, the talis was covering the Rebbe's head, but you can watch as during Kol Nidre.
In other words, the reason why the Rebbe came down to the floor level was because he was being given the Sefer Torah for Kol Nidre.
Yes, because the Rebbe would hold the Sefer Torah for Kol Nidre, and officially when holding the Sefer Torah for Kol Nidre means you're part of a Beis Din. So you need to have minimum of 3 Sefer Torah. By the Rebbe, there was usually 4 or 5 Sefer Torah taken out. One was for the Rebbe. One, the time when he was alive, the Rebbe's brother-in-law, the Rashad. A third Sefer Torah was given to Rabbi Chadakov. Another Sefer Torah for the Chazan. And now I'm having a blank who was holding the 5th Sefer Torah sometime. And of course, Mashiach Sefer Torah was held by the Chazan, and then Kol Nidre started. Kol Nidre was always took a while. As we know in Lubavitch, we're not makpid to start Kol Nidre before it gets dark. By the time the Rebbe finished the bracha, by the time the Rebbe came down, by the time they said Tehillim, Kol Nidre started. It was already nighttime for sure. And Ma'ariv was a very interesting Ma'ariv. You can through the Machzer, the Rebbe would klap by Oben Egunim, Darkei Chalikeinu, and Kiyanu Amecha, and all the piyutim, and it was a very, obviously the Rebbe coming in with a kittel. My memories is already the newer kittel that the Rebbe wore. The Rebbe used to wear a kittel, I think from the Rebbe Maharash or from the Frierdiker Rebbe, that was very worn out, and it was like a short kittel, like a kind of a long shirt. But when I was a kid, the Rebbe already made a new kittel made out of 100% linen. Just to know, the Rebbe wore a kittel that was not buttoned. It was like you put the head through
a robe.
Huh?
A robe.
A robe without open, but it's not open in the front. Only open in the for the neck, for the head, and for the sleeves. And on top of the kittel, the Rebbe wore his gartel, and on top of that a talis. It was very interesting during Yom Kippur. You can always notice the whole Yom Kippur, the Rebbe wore a red, tattered, worn-out handkerchief around his neck. And they say it was from the Tzemach Tzedek. Sometimes the Rebbe also wore a white, scarf around his neck. I'm not sure exactly what that was. Also, it was noticeable many years, the gartel that the Rebbe wore on Yom Kippur was a very old, worn-out gartel. Like pieces falling from it. So apparently, it must have been from one of the earlier Rebbeim.
After davening, the Rebbe stayed. They would say till the entire Tillim, and the Rebbe would stay downstairs.
Yes, that was a very special time. From when I was a child all the way through the end. After the davening was over, the Rebbe would sit down in his chair and say the whole Tillim. What was unique about that Tehillim, at least all the years that I remember, for short till Tav Shem Ches, was a very slow Tillim. It took close to 2 hours, sometime more than 2 hours. The Chazan went slow, the Rebbe went slow. The Chazan was Levi Yitzchak Shmerling for many, many years, and from Eretz Yisrael, and he would kind of wait to see that the Rebbe is up to his speed. So he would go pretty slow, the Rebbe would go slow. Not everybody stayed in 770. Older people and older children left. So the crowd was at least a third less, sometimes half less. So it was a very calm, quiet time, with no pushing. Everybody had a place, and it was just a calm time to watch the Rebbe sitting there and say the whole Tillim from A to Z. They say that in the early years, when 770 was much smaller, you can actually hear, was the only time you can actually hear the Rebbe say Tehillim. Obviously, when 770 was much bigger, that was impossible. But that was a very special sight to say Tehillim along with the Rebbe. I only started maybe when I was 11 or 12. Before that, I would also go home because it was way too late at night. The davening finished, 9 o'clock or something, and then Tehillim would start.
Very nice. Moving on to the day, and if I could just plant in the back of your mind as you go throughout the entire day of Yom Kippur, if there's a story or a special moment that maybe you had with the Rebbe, or something that you saw that was unique. Maybe there was something unique that you saw a specific year. So as you go throughout the entire day, feel free to share it.
Okay. Yom Kippur, the Rebbe was in shul the entire day besides the break. The davening started 10 o'clock. There were a few years where there was unique situations. I remember the Yom Kippur War. I was a little kid during the Yom Kippur War. The Rebbe said Tehillim lots of the time because the Rebbe already knew there was a war. I didn't understand, but I was too little. But then in the end, by Ne'ilah, the Rebbe called all the children from 770 to go up to the Bima. I was only 3 years old, and I remember being pushed and crying, but in the end, I kind of went off to the side. But it was very special to watch all the Kinderlach stand around the Rebbe and say, Avinu Malkeinu. And all during Napoleon's March, all the kids were around the Rebbe that year. One year, the Rebbe came in late Yom Kippur morning. I don't remember why. There was something, somebody was sick or something, and the Rebbe was waiting for some report. But generally, the Rebbe came in 10 o'clock, and davening started with Avinu Malkeinu. If it wasn't Shabbos, with the tune, singing Avinu Malkeinu, and then started Shachris. Obviously, davening of Yom Kippur is very long. The whole day is very dramatic to just watch the davening the Rebbe would make with his hands for all the nigunim. Obviously, the Kriyas HaTorah wasn't the song of Yom Kippur, and the Rebbe did not get maftir Yom Kippur by Shachris. Only by Mincha the Rebbe got maftir Yoina. Interesting that Tisha B'Av the Rebbe would get maftir Shachris and Mincha. I don't know the reason.
Who would get maftir on Yom Kippur?
Rabbi Chadakov, in my memory, but maybe there were others also sometime. Also, obviously, Simchas Torah, the Rebbe didn't have maftir because the Rebbe had Chasan Bereshis. The one of the dramatic parts of Yom Kippur was watching the Rebbe fal kodim during Musaf. When the Avodah started, and very dramatic tune, and the Chazan would scream, Ato Kainanta, and he would go with the Nusach of Lubavitch, Maseira, the singing of the ending of the Avodah, na 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 na. So it took the tune of davening to a very serious time, and to watch the Rebbe watch the Chazan during Aleinu, which was also Rosh Hashanah, by the way, and then during the 3 bowings of the V'Hakoyanim. This is the way it was, just so you know. By Aleinu L'Shabeach, many people didn't know this, and therefore they missed seeing the Rebbe fal kodim. Because people thought that when the Chazan says "Vanachnu kodim," Vanachnu kodim, and the whole shul bows, and they thought the Rebbe bowed. And then they would look, the Rebbe didn't bow. The Rebbe would bow beginning, before the Chazan started. So when the Chazan would bow, the Rebbe would already be up to watch the Chazan. The same thing by V'Hakoyanim. As soon as the Chazan said the word V'Hakoyanim, the Rebbe bowed right away. Before the Chazan said, as soon as the Chazan said the word V'Hakoyanim, the Rebbe would say the whole Nusach V'Hakoyanim in his Machzor, and the Rebbe would fall Koydim. As soon as the Chazan started the word V'Hakoyanim, the Rebbe would already bow on his hands, put his forehead to the ground, put his thumbs. Actually, as children, we'll be able to peek and to see. Wouldn't see the Rebbe's face, but we can actually see the Rebbe leaning on his thumbs. And for a second, the Rebbe would lift his knees off the ground, so it says so in the Minhagim, only leaning on his thumbs and on his toes, and forehead touching the floor, and only the toes and the finger thumbs are on the floor, and the knees are up in the air for a split second. And then the Rebbe would get up and stand and face the Chazan, the whole V'Hakoyanim. So by the time the Chazan said, the Rebbe was already standing facing the Chazan, looking at the Chazan the whole time. The Rebbe would just watch the Chazan do the whole thing. And the Rebbe's face was Yom Kippur-dik, like as kids, Kain Gadol, Malach Elikim, whatever we would say, it was a very different type of serious and kind of out of this world look on the Rebbe's face, as known from the Rabbeim and the Rebbe also. The Rebbe had different faces, so to speak. When the Rebbe wore tefillin, it was one face. By a maimer, a different face. By a sicha, different. You can notice it even today in the pictures and videos. It was a different sight. And Yom Kippur was very special.
Different than Tkiyos.
Yes.
I guess
that was the time where you saw the Rebbe's face the longest, besides Mafter Yaina, was watching the Chazan do the V'Hakoyanim, which was very special, and people would push a lot to be able to watch the Rebbe during that time. Where my seat was near my father, so I was on the left side of the Aron Kodesh, so it was almost directly in that direction. So I had the privilege for 20 years to see that, 18 years, to see that vision, which was very very special. Always when the Hakainin is done in any shul, wherever I am, it always brings up a lot of emotions because of that steer of watching the Rebbe looking at the Chazan, go on his knees and bow down, and then the Chazan being picked up by two helpers. The Rebbe would watch that until the end, and then the Rebbe would turn back around and continue. After Musaf was over, there was Birchas Koyanim, and then the Rebbe would also go down on the floor for Birchas Koyanim, and that was one of the times where people close behind the Rebbe, you can watch the Rebbe doing the movements like it says in the Siddur. Yivarech on the center, Hashem in the center. The Rebbe would not just keep his head like a Yivarechecha like this, just straight. They would go with the song, like Yivarechecha, and then the Chazan would say Adai Shem. When the Kohanim would say Hashem, they would go like this, Adai Shem, Vishmerecha, Vishmerecha, Yo'er, like that. And it would with the beat of the tune, move his head a few times in every direction, like it says in Sefer HaMenhagim. Then the Rebbe went out for the Hafsaka, and the Rebbe would come back. Something very interesting when the Rebbe came back for Mincha of Yom Kippur. Most of the years that I remember, the Rebbe walked in to Mincha Yom Kippur with a hat. The Rebbe would wear his kittel with his talus, but his hat. The Rebbe walked up to his bima, put the siddur down on the bima, opened the two little doors, would lift up the shmata, the stender has the white cover. The Rebbe would lift up the cover, open the two doors, take his hat off. The Rebbe didn't do this. The Rebbe took his hat off like this and slid it into the stender and closed the doors. The Rebbe would not put his hat like this. The Rebbe would put his hat straight up into the stender and close the doors. Close the doors and then lift the talus over his head. So for us, that was the only time where you would see the Rebbe without a hat and without a talus, just the Rebbe's holy head. Sometimes before Tkiyas and different times, Napoleon's March, and the Rebbe would clap and the talus would slide off. But that was a moment when the Rebbe would take his hat and put it in, because the Rebbe would take it out right after Napoleon's March for Ein Kelekenu of Ne'ilah. The Rebbe would again open the doors, take the talus off his head, take out the hat, and put on the holy hat for Ein Kelekenu. Then was Mincha. Mafter Yaina was a very special time. It was hard to also be close by Mafter Yaina and then also be close to the front of 770 to watch Napoleon's March. So kind of most of the time you had to pick which one you wanted to be. But Mafter Yaina was a very special time by the Rebbe. The Rebbe said Mafter Yaina very slowly, and many times the Rebbe had tears and cried during Mafter Yaina. It was a very special Haftarah. 770 was very packed. The bima was very far back, not where it's usually every Shabbos. There was Teshuva Yom Kippur. They pushed the Rebbe. The Kriyas HaTorah bima was even further back behind the next beam, and so to be in the front, it was very hard to hear the Haftarah. But I would go as I was older to push in the back and be able to hear clearly the Rebbe saying Mafter Yaina was a very special sight. After that, the Rebbe came back for Ne'ilah. By Ne'ilah, got very pushy because everyone is squeezing every seat. Every person who has a seat, his uncle.
You're saying that came back. That means the Rebbe left between Mincha and Ma'ariv?
Sorry, came back from the bima to the front of the shul. After Yaina, the Rebbe would walk behind the Sefer Torah back to the front of the shul, and that's when a lot of pushing started happening towards the front of the shul, because everybody wanted to be able to see Napoleon's March. And every person who had a seat would bring their cousin, their father, their uncle, their grandsons. So it started getting more and more and more packed. The whole 770, and people from other shuls also came for Ne'ilah. And Ne'ilah was a very special time. Number one, the Aron Kodesh is open for the whole davening. Number two, the Rebbe stood the entire Ne'ilah. The Rebbe didn't sit. And with all the nigunim and the chasmeinu, and it was just a charged time. Towards the end of Ne'ilah, the Avinu Malkeinu, at the end of Ne'ilah, the Rebbe always said for a long time. Most of the time, the Rebbe was crying. And before that Avinu Malkeinu, before a regular Avinu Malkeinu, they would only sing it once. And this time, by Ne'ilah, it was usually more than once. Once, twice, 3 times was average. I remember one year they sang Avinu Malkeinu 10 times. And again, and the Rebbe would keep on going like this. And the last time, usually, whether it was 3 or sometimes, I remember for sure when it was 10, by the 10th time, the Rebbe banged with both hands like this. There was facing Mizrach. But you can see that the Rebbe was basically shaking from his ragshus, and the crowd went extremely. The Hir Tshuva that was going on was on a whole other level during that nigun of the last Avinu Malkeinu. The Rebbe would say Avinu Malkeinu very slowly, and the Chazan would not conclude Avinu Malkeinu until Rabbi Groner was able to see the Rebbe Siddur that the Rebbe is holding at the end. And that sometimes took a long time because the Rebbe took a long time, and there was sometimes crying. In the earlier years, they say you can actually hear the Rebbe crying. It was also visible in the beginning of Napoleon's March. Many times when the Rebbe went up, as I'll explain in a minute, you can still see the Rebbe was still crying by the first half of Napoleon's March. And then it turned into a big simcha. After Ne'ilah, obviously, when Avinu Malkeinu was over, you have the one-time Shema Yisrael, and 7 times Baruch Shem, and Hashem Hu Elikim, which was a tremendous sight in 770, with this shouting of the 7 times Hashem Hu Elikim, and then went Kaddish. And as soon as the Chazan said the Imru Amen, the singing didn't start until the Rebbe started with his hand. Ay, 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 ay. And the Rebbe would keep facing Mizrach. Would clap with one hand, later on two hands. And most of the time, they sang a half of Napoleon's March, sometimes the whole niggin, most of the time like half, and then the Rebbe turned around. The Rebbe didn't turn around the first second of Napoleon's March. The beginning was the Rebbe was still facing the wall. Ay, 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 ay. And only when it started the next part did the Rebbe turn. I still remember as a kid, the Rebbe's chair was against the Mizrach wall, and the Rebbe would jump up onto his chair and face the crowd and dance Napoleon's March on the chair. Later on, they brought a box, and then they made steps with a platform, like you see in this painting, I guess. And remember that people.
It's a painting. It's not. It's not the real thing. It's a painting.
It's a painting. But if you notice the railings, the back of the railings. One year they made for many years they had metal railings. I think Teshuva Yom was the first time they had the steps like this with the railing. The Rebbe's kittel sleeves, as you can tell, are much bigger than the kapata sleeves. And one time, when the first time they made the railing, for whatever reason, they didn't round it off in the back. So on the way down, the Rebbe's sleeve got stuck in the railing. The Rebbe kind of went down and got stuck. And the Rebbe had to go halfway back up and pull his hand away from the railing. This time I just remember that. But once they had the platform and the steps, and then in the middle of the niggin, the Rebbe went up, and initially the Rebbe would clap on Napoleon's March, sometimes with one hand, and then sometimes with two hands. There was three tenuas. Clapping in the beginning, yeah, 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 and then with one hand, holding the talus with one hand and doing it with the other hand, and then sometimes with both hands. And sometimes Napoleon's March can go for 5 minutes, sometimes for 25 minutes. It was a sight to be seen, with the whole 770 jumping up and down. And initially, many times the Rebbe's palace would cover, in the beginning, most of the years, when the Rebbe would clap, the Rebbe was still crying. So the talus would cover the Rebbe's face. And only the next round of Napoleon's March, the Rebbe would pick up the talus, uncover his holy eyes, and then you can see how the Rebbe's seriousness turned into simcha and shining, and like a simcha, like you'll see later in the pictures when the Rebbe left 770. In a minute, we'll show you. It's when the Rebbe's face was shining like Kayin Gadol that comes out of Kodesh HaKadoshim. So in Napoleon's March, you saw two opposites. The beginning, very serious, red. The Rebbe's face was red when he first uncovered his face, and then immediately it turned into a shining, bright smile of simcha that we won. This painting of that you're showing is kind of where the talus is still covering the Rebbe's eyes. Sometimes the talus will be even lower, and then only in the middle of the next round of when the niggin started again, the Rebbe would uncover his or something in the middle of the niggin, whatever it was. With that moment, that turned into tremendous joy. Then the Rebbe would come down the steps, and the Chazan would blow the Tkiya G'dayla, finish Kaddish, and then, as I said before, the Rebbe would put on his hat, Kaveh and Kilakenu and Tehillim, and then would be Ma'ariv. And after Ma'ariv, someone made Havdalah, and then the Rebbe would say 3 times, Good Yom Tov, Good Yom Tov, Good Yom Tov. That year that you're showing the picture now, they announced, usually they would announce, soon is going to be Kiddush Levana, and tomorrow Shachris is going to be whatever time they announce Shachris. And the Gabbai said that it's cloudy outside, so we're not sure. So somebody ran outside, and somebody ran back and said, "Sinishtakein Levana." There's no moon. So the Rebbe smiled. Rebbe says, "There is a moon. It's just covered by the clouds." Farana Levana. He said, "There's no moon. It's not Levana. It's just covered with the clouds." And the Rebbe said, "So leich achel besimcha lachmacha. Go eat your bread with joy." And Kiddush Levana happened whenever it happened. But most of the years, Kiddush Levana, almost all the years, Kiddush Levana happened right away when the Rebbe left. The Rebbe would scream 3 times Gut Yom Tov. The Rebbe would walk slowly. It was another time the Rebbe walked slowly out of 770 because it was so crowded. The Rebbe kept on looking at everybody and continued the Simcha, Matzah Yom Kippur. There were very big smiles when the Rebbe was upstairs near his room, coming out to Kiddush Levana, coming back from Kiddush Levana. There are quite a few pictures where the Rebbe would go to Kiddush Levana still wearing his kittel, gartel, and talis and hat. But the Rebbe did not wear his Yom Kippur shoes by Kiddush Levana. Maybe there was one time, yes, but all the years the Rebbe went into his room, as it says in the Minhagim, wash Nagelwasser, wash your face, rinse your mouth, change his shoes, and then go make a Kiddush Levana. And then the Rebbe would make Havdalah, would go home, make Havdalah for the Rebbetzin, or later on after Ramches, make Havdalah himself. And that's the end of Yom Kippur, and then everybody went home to eat, and whoever wanted to come watch something interesting after that would come back to 770. Oh, here's a picture of the Rebbe's beautiful smile after Yom Kippur. Would come back to 770, watch the Bachrim build the Rebbe's sukkah. Over the years, the sukkah became fancier and fancier and fancier, and was a special sukkah in the front of 770, where the Bachrim would put it up. It was supposed to be part of it, and then put on the schach, and it had a special roof. And in later years, they made a sink inside with plumbing, so the Rebbe was able to have a sink there. And then it was fancy wood, and there was actually 2 shelves, and those 2 shelves had sfarim. I believe part of the sfarim were the Rebbe Marash, the whole Rebbe Marash sfarim, and also later on there was a set of Rambam Ma'am and other sfarim in the sukkah. Mayane HaYeshua, I remember, which was as you'll hear later from the next section. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and we should have once again Yom Kippur together with the Rebbe in the Beis Hamikdash. Take off from Miyad Mamish. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very, very much, Rabbi Lipsker. And obviously, and even before Yom Kippur takes place, we should be zeichet to have Scholars of Melech HaMashiach taking us all to the Gula Shlema, where we'll be able to celebrate all these Yom Tovim, Zman Simchasinu, together with the Rebbe, and we'll be able to hear Teirach Hadash Mipiv Shel Melech HaMashiach. Take it from me and Mamish now. A grace and Yashar Koyach.
Amen. Thank you.